Welcome, welcome to the Class of 91 Entrepreneurship Roundtable. Thank you so much for being here with us and for your patience with the rain. I'm very excited about this event because I literally had a conversation with Mariam, I think 4 years ago when we first started thinking about reunion and what I wanted to have, one of the events I wanted to have, and it was talking about our classmates' lives and for a reunion to be about coming together, not about impressing one another or who's doing better or who's doing worse or anything like that, really focusing on how people make decisions in their lives and their careers. And we thought about bringing a whole set of amazing and wonderful entrepreneurs together to share their stories. And so I thank the panelists for being here and working with me over the course of the year to put it together. I'd like to introduce Josh Becker, who's going to moderate the panel, and he is an incredibly successful entrepreneur and venture capitalist in his own right. He's been doing that for 15 years. Started New Cycle Venture in 2007. Yeah. And he's going to lead us through a great conversation today. And I wanted to thank both Mariam and Andy for the Stash Rewards cards and the Minted.com cards. Anybody who didn't get a card, there's going to be a paper circulating. You'll get an online certificate. Mariam has doubled her donation. A very kind $100 donation, so thanks, Mariam.
Except for this morning's event.
Take it away, Josh.
All right, thanks. Before we get going, I'd like to get a round of applause for Melissa, who this is really her vision. And in thinking about this, I think her vision was very much aligned with my beliefs around entrepreneurship. And as we talked about this, I think entrepreneurship is really a state of mind. And it's really the act of creating something new. And I think we have some great representative folks up here who have done different kinds of businesses and different kinds of and different kinds of opportunity, from art galleries to tech businesses to more traditional businesses. And we were talking about it. I mean, I'm as proud as I've started a number of nonprofits. I'm as proud as the nonprofits I've started, as stuff we've done in the for-profit realm. And so I think it's just great that we have that represented here, and we'll get into that a little bit today. I thought we also have a great diversity in terms of people who maybe knew they were going to be entrepreneurs right out of school and are on their, 10th business, like Dan, and other people who had no idea they were going to be entrepreneurs and ended up kind of stumbling into businesses and starting things relatively recently. So I think what we'll start out doing, I'll just ask people to give just maybe a really quick intro just about themselves, where they live now, maybe on the project that they're currently working on, or if you're taking time off, maybe your most recent project. And then we'll go through, I'll ask some questions that get into some issues like people's past to the entrepreneurship, kind of balance in their lives, maybe one lesson that they'll never forget. We've already heard some great things that I heard talking to the panelists earlier, and then we'll open it up to questions. So what I'll do is ask people then to kind of go around and give a really quick intro on something they're currently working on.
Thanks, Josh. My name is Monica Brand. I manage an impact investing fund called Frontier Investments. We are looking for new business models in emerging markets that will expand financial inclusion. I live in Washington. I'm on the road a lot. I'm actually going to Zambia tomorrow evening. I just want to put a shout out to, I know there's a bunch of people in our class who are also entrepreneurs, and I think it was a really random selection, so I feel very privileged to be part of this great group.
Hello, I'm Scott Schwager. I'm an artist living in London, and a couple of years ago I started an artist-run space called Ace and Lion Gallery, which is on the ground of Caledonian Road, where it's located. I'm the group of people who had no idea what they wanted to do, and I feel very humbled to be in this room, particularly at the front, but it's been a great adventure. So.
I'm Volpe, Jelaca. I'm in Arlington Heights, just outside Chicago right now. And I am among the people who had no intention or interest in becoming an entrepreneur and fell into it and have now sort of stayed in it. I was at United Airlines doing business development after 9/11 and bankruptcy. There was a woman in my group who was doing the snack box program, came up with that for United, the shelf stable that you pay like $5, $6, depending on which airline, which year. And she realized you could do a healthier version with food that doesn't need to be refrigerated, so they don't have to throw the food out every other flight. And came to me one day and said, "What do you think about this idea?" I said, "I think that's awesome, and I'm ready to move on to something else. When I was at United, I had to take a demotion when I had my first son, and I wanted to stay home 1 day a week, just work from home or do flex hours. And I said, okay, that's it for me here, because I need to be doing something else. So just kind of lucky timing and the right place at the right time.
She wouldn't hand that one back up here, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mariam Naficy, and I founded a company called Minted.com, which is a global design community. People from all over the world submit graphic designs and then vote to tell us what to sell, curate our assortment, give each other critiques and feedback. And we print those designs in the form of holiday cards, stationery, wedding invitations, etc., that we sell to consumers. So we're commerce and community blended. I didn't really know I wanted to start a company either out of Williams. I fell into it eventually after business school. Started a company called Eve.com, and then did a couple things, and then started Minted about 4 years ago.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, terrific. Hi, I'm Eric, and I live in San Francisco with my wife and 3 kids. And the reason why I'm up here is about 12 or so years ago, I helped start a discount online travel company called Hotwire. And so I've become a travel guy over the last 10 or 12 years. And it's been a terrific experience. Like Mariam, as well as a few others, being an entrepreneur was not what I was thinking about at all when I was at Williams. And I like to broaden the data set. I'd be curious to ask the audience, how many of you out there are doing something that's very different than what you planned you were doing? So it's still a minority, because I think that's something I think it's an interesting theme you have to think through, is that when you go to a good school and you have a lot of wonderful opportunities like we all have at Williams, it's easy to really plan it out and not deviate from a course, and getting to a point where if you want to make a change that's very fundamentally different from what you thought you were going to do is a tough challenge, and that's one that I think I went through. It sounds like Mariam and a few others went through that as well. So I'll pass it on to Dan, who never had any doubt on what he did.
Okay, so it's true. I started my first company when I was 4 years old, selling fruits and vegetables inside of my house. A reporter, I made a stop sign, and I would stand in the middle of the road, and so every car had to stop. My mother, she made the applesauce. She didn't know, why I was so successful out there until a reporter said, does your mother know you're doing this? I'm going to put you in the paper if you stop getting in the middle of the street. She came up, but I have a great big photo of that. So because I've been an entrepreneur from that age, and I can kind of go through almost every year or two different things I've tried. I've had an unbelievable number of failures, big and horrible and scary. So just the two worst were I started cable TV. Well, I had a friend who was telling me, "Do you want to be the monopoly cable TV provider in Ukraine?" I had been doing management consulting at the time, and I was like, that sounds good. So I rented him over, and I met his partners, and I kind of, at the same time I was doing consulting, I was looking at new opportunities in wireless and communications and content, and there was like internet stuff going on. I was thinking, should I do internet, or should I? Then I had this opportunity to do to be the monopoly. So I bought one domain, which was Amsterdam.com. I was thinking, porn on the internet, that makes sense. I didn't understand anything else. But anyway, I did start, or founded the Ukraine didn't work out, but we started a phone network, but then we did, the same group, we did get licenses and started the monopoly cable TV networks in Azerbaijan and Armenia, which are still, they still exist. BBTV, Baku and Boston TV Communications, and AATV, Armenia and America Communications. One partner of the 3 of us was killed, the other one stole the business, so that was bad. Another disaster that I had.
It's an occupational hazard.
much worse, but I can't get worse than that. But prior to my current company, I had a business that may have touched everyone in the room. It was called it was called Direct Revenue, and there was, you could get free software or paid software. But the free software, things like Kazaa and Morpheus and those things, they would, they'd come with something that would also go down on your computer. If you guys remember those pop-up ads. So I had a company that got onto 150 million computers. We had, venture capital backed and like very big law firms telling us exactly how to do it. But that didn't stop Elliot Spitzer from deciding it was a really bad business. And so my partners and I were sued by Spitzer and then later by Cuomo and shut down. We won the lawsuit. But what can I tell you? I'm sorry. The day that we finally went to court, after spending a year trying to negotiate, a settlement agreement, you're scared because the attorney general is suing you, and they're suing us for $75 billion with V dollars, $500 per computer, so we all had our plans. Like I was going to move to Costa Rica, my partner was going to England, one was going to go to Italy. We had schools picked out, and we go to court, and the judge is this old guy, and you're scared because Spitzer's going to be the next governor, and you can make him, put him on the Supreme Court of New York or something. And we're in there, and it's like positioned as a spyware case. And we didn't do any spying; we did advertising. The pop was very annoying. But the judge, we saw that the judge, pretty much when we understood that he realized there was no spying, and we weren't doing anything like that. And the practices that the AG didn't like, we changed 2 years ago at the same time that Yahoo and Google did. Basically told them, almost get out of the courtroom. So we knew that we were not going to lose the case. So then I went to the closest Starbucks, and I actually sat down and wrote the plan out for Django, which is my current company. It's an internet radio site that's similar to Pandora. It's like the number 2 in that space, distant number 2. But its difference is that rather than having lots of audio ads, once an hour you'll hear an emerging artist on Django. So audio ads pay a little bit of money to us. Emerging artists actually pay to get played, so we're able to have a similar experience to Pandora just with far fewer ads. Check it out, Django.com.
Top that.
I would try, but Kaufman warned me before this that it was videotaped, A. Children in the audience. I probably pushed it with that Amsterdam thing. Mostly I'm happy that, my name is Jason Prieston. I live in Red Lodge, Montana with my wife and 3 kids, and mostly I'm happy that of the 4 or 5 deals that Kaufman and I have done together, it didn't make his top 2 disasters. But this does last for an hour, so we'll probably get there. There are times I wanted to fall out of being an entrepreneur. I don't know if that was what my goal was, but it can be very challenging. There are definitely days you want to quit. The problem is when you're the guy who starts the company, it is tough to quit. It's not hard to get fired, but it is tough to quit. And I've started also a bunch of nonprofits. They were supposed to be profitable. It wasn't the plan. You don't always have to. But my latest one, which I'm keen to talk to you about, is totally different than the technology and telecom companies that I started when in the mid-90s. I was supposed to be an investor, and that fellow, the guy who was going to buy it, who actually knew something about the business, dropped out. So I decided, well, I should write the check. So I bought with Kaufman a cosmetology school. And so it's like, it's the greatest thing on earth. It's like selling missiles to both sides of the war, because there are always people who want to get their hair cut, and there are always people who are giving haircuts that want to get out of the business. So there's a constant stream of students. It's very undermanaged. The workforce is very different than any workforce that I've managed in the past. Most don't have, actually have a lot of employees, barely have high school educations, and it's very different than the caliber of folks I worked with before, but they're entrepreneurial, and they want to succeed, and they want to feed their families. So the key is to grow that business. It requires making the transition from kind of an owner-operator model where the previous person owned the business, knew how to cut hair, and knew how to manage all the different parts of the business, to someone like me who can't dress himself without his wife, having, trying to figure that out and grow that business. So it's very different for me, but I'm definitely enjoying it.
And you guys do both have great haircuts, so it makes sense. It all makes sense. That's perfect.
I'm Jeff Lowe, founder of Stash Hotel Rewards, and I was at Expedia for 4 years. Well, Eric was actually at Hotwire, so we never worked at Expedia, the mothership, at the same time. I left, actually my wife dragged me out of Seattle. It's because the drip was driving me. I was crazy. So I moved to Silicon Valley and walked into a company that I had gotten a new job with and knew immediately it was the wrong place for me. I don't know if that's happened to you before. And so I left and went into the shed behind my house in the Silicon Valley tradition, where everywhere else they would, you did that in Connecticut, they would say, have you seen a psychiatrist? And in Silicon Valley they'd say, do you need a lawyer? And do you need some funding? So I got an idea and I said, well, how am I going to actually take this PowerPoint and create something? And I knew only one person who was smart enough to do all that. It was my co-JA, Andy Wan. And Andy had just left Zillow at the time, his wife, and he had told his wife he was going to finish the basement, he was going to do, and then apply to Microsoft again. He said, I'll give you 1 month, and then I told Danielle that I'm going to go back to Microsoft. And so Danielle still thinks Andy's at Microsoft. 2.5 years later, and she's not here. We launched Stash formally a year ago, just over a year ago, with 65 hotels. There are now 152 partners. We're the largest rewards program for independent hotels in the U.S. We're the fastest growing hotel rewards program in the world, and hope to be on scale with Starwood and Hyatt by middle of next year. And our whole passion is that people love to travel to experience new things and not to stay in the same big box cookie cutter hotel. So we found a lot of people who share that passion, and we are a team now of about 22 spread around the U.S. Oh, and one employee in Malta as well.
I'm Andy Wand, and I live in Seattle with my wife and 2 daughters. And Jeff is right, there's a good reason why he left Seattle. It has not stopped raining there since, I think, August of last year. Since Jeff has already told you about Stash, I think I'd tell you about kind of 2 of the more glamorous projects that I get to work on at Stash. One is I just finished finding our Seattle office. It's a new office space in which there are holes in the roof. And I'm also responsible for keeping the team in snacks from Costco. So
That's critical with engineers. That's a critical role with engineers. Someone has to keep them in snacks. Well, that's great. Well, as you can see, we have a lot of interesting experiences and a lot of great stories and a lot of great successes. And as we all know in entrepreneurship, you learn a lot from your failures too. So it's great that people are willing to sort of put those out on the table as well. We already hit on a lot of themes that I want to sort of touch on through this panel, just kind of going through this. So maybe I'll just kind of dive into a few of those. One, it's interesting to hear people's stories about whether you thought you were going to be an entrepreneur or not. And I had no intention of being an entrepreneur, and I was I went to work for an environmental consulting firm after college, and then spent about 6 months in Central America. I came back, was working for a congressperson who then lost. And then Cliff Majerzik and I, in 1994, so I said, because I had like 10 months to kill, we said, let's decide to start a company, and someone introduced it to the internet. Like, this thing could be big. We decided to start a career services company in 1994. And fortunately, we were a little bit early, but it was a great experience. And it actually morphed a couple times. It is actually still going, that company. But, it's funny. So it's good to hear people's stories, how they kind of came into it. Dan, I thought, interesting, you and I were talking earlier, and you were saying a little bit about how the one constant is that it never turns out exactly the way you think. So maybe you could kind of elaborate on that a little bit, and for the purposes of entrepreneurship.
PG, Sure. Whenever I end up in a conversation with somebody about, what does it, mean to start a company, or they thought about it, and should they do it? One theme that always comes up is how, usually before you start the company, you're thinking about it, it builds into your mind into this. It's an amazing idea. It's it's this service or product that the world needs. It doesn't know it needs it. You're the person that's going to bring it to them. You're going to make a lot of money. It's going to be very easy, actually. Because it's a good idea. So the more experiences you have, one thing for me anyway, I've learned is that whatever you think is going to happen, it's not that it's not exactly going to happen. It's not even going to be close. Or at least that's been my experience. It's probably different depending on the type of company and the type of person, type of entrepreneur. But it's been so extreme for me that again, I always convince myself up front that it's that good an idea and that good a thing to do. But now I know that one half of my brain is telling me it's like the other half is reminding me that there will come a time when I'll hate myself for ever thinking of it in the first place, because it's so, like, I'm interested if other people have had the experience, and when you started, and it's very exciting, and if you reach the point in time where you wished so much that you've never, ever thought of it, what is wrong with you? Because that does happen, and it's a matter of how do you deal with, like, if you can accept that will happen, and then you're going to have to scramble and try to think of something new from that new situation when you'll know more. You'll have met the market, and you'll have learned the market didn't like what you're trying to do, but you'll have learned maybe, and then you can pivot and do something else. So a key thing for me has been, you don't know what's going to happen. You have to go out there knowing that you really don't. You're going to try, and you're going to have to you're going to have to really adapt.
See, Mariam reaching for the mic.
I was reaching for the mic because you reminded me so much of our first 6 months after starting my recent company, Minted, which was a complete and utter failure. In the first couple months, we opened our doors and nothing sold at all. Literally, we had not one sale, I think, for at least 30 days, and it was a really frightening experience. And we knew that we were completely off the mark in terms of our product offering. And at that point, I thought, gee, I cannot believe I'm in this. I want to give all the money back to my friends and family. I've totally screwed up here, and had to completely change our business model. So we went from being, we had signed on a number of stationery brands to carry online, and we had one competition, a design competition online, and the 22 designs we'd gotten out of that first competition, I think they were starting to sell a little bit, so we had this glimmer of hope that maybe there was something in crowdsourcing. And so then we decided to just, all the money we'd spent on launching the branded product, we had to basically ditch all that product and race towards starting to hold competitions and sourcing more from the crowd. And that's how we saved the company. We basically almost completely lost it in the first couple months. So, but I did want to get out. I wanted to get out. The only thing keeping me in was this commitment I felt to all these friends who had given us money. I raised $2.5 million from friends, basically. And it just felt like I couldn't let them down. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I'm actually interim CEO of now one of our companies. The first night I was started to do it, something crazy happened with the business, and I said to one of the investors, I can't sleep, and he said, "Welcome to being on the operating side." So that reminded me. What you said reminded me of something that I was talking about Jeff earlier, and you were talking about how kind of bouncing your idea off the world and how that then instructs the business. Do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think echoing what Dan and Mariam said, Steve Blank, who's this famous definer of the lean startup movement, says that no idea survives interface with your customer. Your customer doesn't like your idea. You think it's great, but you go talk to the market, they don't like it. And so on our side, it was just Andy and me and a lawyer we knew and 2 salespeople, and we ran very lean for the first year and a half. And during that period, we were trying to sell our product to airlines as we were going to sell them hotel rooms, and we thought that was going to work in the second month. We were done, great. And or we were going to sell it to hotels for a very different structure. And probably in that process, talked to over 500 hotels. And each time they say, well, this doesn't make sense because you need to do this. And so we make the idea a little bit better. And upon the 499th conversation, they would say, oh my God, how did you think of this? You got the geniuses. And we would just be iterating on our idea over and over. And I think that is so critical. And actually, I was thinking about what resonates about Williams or what about
the college experience, this notion of iteration, I think, is so critical. That you draft an idea, you see how people respond, and you build on it. And I often didn't do that. I would wait until the last minute, and Monica will attest. And you don't have any period for iteration, so things don't get that good, right? But it's providing a structure that your idea can survive. And more often than not, the flame-out companies are the ones that commit to that one great idea and don't provide the runway for the change to occur. That's where they'll die.
Cool. Anyone else want to pick up on that theme? Or otherwise, we'll change it.
Well, yeah, the whole getting
Not
to
about me and my
no. That's after the panel. The getting to Plan B. I mean, a lot of the work I do is, and I after Williams. 2 years after I graduated, moved to Silicon Valley and worked in a number of startups, social enterprises, trying to help the unbanked. So really looking at how do banks and financial institutions, who do they serve, and all these other people that don't, how can we use new business models to serve them? And from that I do it internationally now. And the time in Silicon Valley, where I was there about 5 years, really shaped me. And how do you bring that to emerging markets? And I think even this notion of what kind of education, the idea of continually thinking about Plan B, what I call pattern recognition, so using data and then saying, is my initial business model working? And these are all elements that are critical in bringing there. And what I found though is that, and I talked a little bit, I think, to Jeff, for some people, I actually think that it's sunny and beautiful in Silicon Valley helps. Like this notion that, okay, even though all the evidence in front of me is telling me that this is a bad idea, I shouldn't do it, how do you get up the next morning? Part of it's that pride and responsibility, but part of it is this notion of, okay, we're in the kind of promise area. And so it's a really hard thing to do in many emerging markets, and it's why this new these revolutions, these democratic revolutions that are happening are exciting, because I do think they have economic and entrepreneurial analogs. But I think it's in a critical skill, and I'd love to figure out how in your education system you build that.
Well, I'll just mention one thing. Since Monica mentioned, there's actually a book called Getting to Plan B, by a guy named Randy Komisar out in Silicon Valley, and he's a great guy. I haven't actually read the book, but I love the concept, Getting to Plan B.
I've read it. It's a good book.
Monica says it's a good book, but it's very much on the theme a lot of people have talked about, right? Which is, most startups fail in their initial concept, so it's really about, getting out there, getting to Plan B, and then figuring out what's actually going to work. See, Eric had something to say.
So when we talk about iteration, what is the end point? What is it that you want to achieve as an organization, particularly in the beginning? It's really having an innovative mindset right off the bat. Yep. That's really what you're after. And one thing I thought I could add or suggest is very important, especially in the beginning, is I know very, very few what I would call mountaintop entrepreneurs. And that's, I think, the popular perception of what entrepreneurship is that there's some brilliant person who goes to the top, thinks deep thoughts, comes down with the answers, puts it on a tablet and says, here you go do it, and then everyone just follows the recipe. I can't think of any successful organization that's done that. Typically, I think particularly early on, is you have an idea and you have an openness to iterating it and innovating around it, but most importantly, to do it with people that you really trust and you really respect. So when I, going back to my entrepreneurship experience, it wasn't me, there were four of us. And the trust and the respect that we had across each other was really, really significant, and was critical, that allowed us to go through all the ups and downs and to really test our ideas and our fact base in a very holistic way. The other thing also that's important, in addition to brilliant, or people you really trust and respect, is also making sure that there's a really strong set of complementary skills across that founding team. So and that means being really humble about what it is that you do and what you do well, and more specifically what you don't do well, right? And that takes a lot of honesty, and making sure that you have the confidence to go and find those folks that do what you don't do really well, so that when you do get out there and you do have that good idea and it truly is good and you iterate around it, that the ability to turn it into something that's really meaningful quickly, you have that core that core being, that amoeba, if you will, that will turn into something great.
Awesome. That's a great point. We could probably spend the whole panel just about co-founders and such, but I'm going to move it along, and I want to turn to one thing, and then one other topic, and then we'll kind of get to funding, and then maybe a couple lessons learned, and then we're going to open it up. But one thing we talked about is different kinds of entrepreneurships. I drove up here with Ben Johnson, I'm sure he's in the audience, but he started this Rhode Island Center for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and it's a small business. He's got 2 offices, and I enjoy talking to him about business stuff as much as anyone. And so it's just this interesting concept of different kinds of entrepreneurship. I thought, Scott, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience starting Gallery and what that's been like.
Sure, yeah, Josh and I talked a bit about this, but I worked in my 20s in finance, actually, which wasn't something I planned on. Actually, the only thing, I'm going to get to this, but I really wanted to do this because 20 years ago, if you had started a job company, it would have sent me a different way. When Evan Buxbaum and I didn't have a job, we saw an ad for Mexican spotted owl surveyors.
What was that?
We saw in the job office, or whatever it's called, an ad for Mexican spotted owl surveyors, and they would give the training and there was no experience required. And we sent our CV, and we got that job, and I'm going to do the call. Woo! 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 I also want to, because I don't have a lot of entrepreneurial failures, but we spent the summer at night walking past each other to triangulate the owls. So when you have 2 points, you can find the third one. And no one in the whole team ever found an owl. I traveled for a couple of years, and then I did banking because they'd have me because it was a big time in finance, and then they wouldn't have me anymore, so I went to art school, and I spent about 5 years, I'm not much of a drinker, but with a whiskey bottle and painting, and it got really lonely, and I went back, and I decided I was interested in collaboration art, and I decided, because at the end of my second BA, so I thought if I go back, I'll do a BA again in painting, and they called me Grandpa. I wrote a paper on artist curators in East London, because I liked hanging out there, and a lot of artists just running their own space with no money. And the quality of art varied, so I thought, well, that's something I could do. So anyway, so I did start this gallery, which is an anagram of Caledonian, as I said, so it's called Is and Lion. And what was the question? So it wasn't
I forgot. About starting it up.
Yeah, okay, so I started. So it wasn't really a regular path of success of entrepreneurial things. One of the things that came up, and I guess I learned this a little bit in business school, in London Business School, which the bank paid for, which is brilliant, as well as being in London when I was in my 20s, was financing the entrepreneurial business, which is quite a creative thing. Be interested to hear how you guys do that. Sounds like friends and family, all that. But I wasn't in a position with a lot of people who would be interested in these ideas, so I have been kind of lucky to simultaneously do some things in property, and the gallery is kind of the front of a development project, and that has some government funding, English Heritage, which is great, and I think I should stop talking, but it's been a great experience.
And Pam, do you have something you want to say? I don't know, he was handing it to you. Yeah, let's hear your owl call.
No. I draw the line there. What do you want to talk about that? How we got started, or?
Yeah, if you want. Yeah, we're going to get to the funding question. Actually, probably a good transition. Why don't you talk about how you guys got funding for Go Picnic?
Yeah, I think pretty much most entrepreneurs, unless you're lucky and you fall into a lot of money very quickly, start by bootstrapping it. We left United and went without salaries for a good year and a half. I was fortunate; my husband was working full time. So I was able to fall back on that, plus a lot of credit card offers coming out at the time for 0% interest. So we took full advantage of that for a long time. And then we got to a point where we needed some money. We wanted a prototype. We're making snack boxes, bringing it to other markets, healthy snack boxes, all natural, etc. We're bringing it to school market, other airlines, Amtrak. We're having friends help us actually literally pack the boxes. So we went out, we did a round of friends and family, and raised about $110,000 for that, and then we got to the point where we had the United Airlines contract and some other contracts, so we went out and got some angel funding. One of the great resources for us was the local Chamber of Commerce for Chicago, so we're lucky it was a big city, but they have an entrepreneurial center that was really, the person who's running the Chicago Chamber of Commerce, it was really his baby, his legacy. And they were awesome. They really had no personal intentions. They weren't in it for themselves, really to help entrepreneurs get on their feet. And they were hosting some various fundraising events and they would help you with the business plan, the whole thing. So we went through them, and they were a great help with us getting our business plan together, the whole funding model, and then presenting us to interested investors. We ended up raising over $1 million with their help, and then went from there. So that I would say that if you have a Chamber of Commerce, definitely tap into them, because it's a great resource, and it's entrepreneurs alone. It's really mostly about networking. I mean, it's great reconnecting with everyone here, but so much of it's about networking and getting to the next person, the right person that can help you on your way.
Right. Yeah, that's very helpful. And applause, too. And Pam was telling me earlier that she thinks VCs are evil, so we'll keep that in mind. No, but you were able to fund with Angel. I don't take it personally. But that you were able to fund it with and that was important to you to keep really control. And that was important. And something to think about. With VCs, you do relinquish some control in some cases. So it's important to think about. Hey, anyone else want to talk about funding?
Sure.
Mariam?
Sure, yeah. So with Eve.com, which is the business I founded, which was a cosmetics retailer online in '98, I'd come out of right out of the business school and decided at the time that I felt that the only way to really, I felt that the corporate jobs I'd had were not entirely meritocratic. So I felt, what better way to really, I felt that the consumer market is a meritocratic market. The consumer does not care who is making, it to some degree does not care what the person looks like who is behind the product. So I felt that would be the best way for me to work, was really outside the system in a sense and go straight to the consumer. So I came out of school, didn't look for a job, and raised about $26 million in 3 rounds. I know.
1998. 1988.
That's a lot of money. So that was one approach, and that had its ups and downs. It was very frothy. The VCs were really, we were out for kind of what they called a kind of a market share grab at the time. And then when I sold that company, and
those were the days.
Minted, I wanted more control. I had two children at that point, 7, who are now 7 and 4. But I just had my daughter, and I needed to control the pace of the growth. So I started with a friends and family round. I was trying to decide, did I want to turn this into a cash flow business? Did I want to turn it into what kind of business was this going to end up? And it was very experimental, so I wanted to keep a lot of control. So I started with friends and family, and then I just closed my second VC round with Benchmark and Menlo Ventures. But I've always had that healthy, I don't want to call it mistrust, but I wonder sometimes about the alignment of incentives between a VC and an entrepreneur. So I've been trying to be very careful with that. And there are lots of ways to build in protection for the entrepreneur, the way that you negotiate your terms. So I've taken 2 routes. In the end, I decided this business was bigger than I was starving it for capital, and decided to go for the venture money after all. And I'm happy with it, because we built in enough protection for the entrepreneurs behind Minted that we don't feel like we've given up too much control.
Right.
One thought is basically the more money you raise, the more outside influences you have. And unless you're really careful, that can add additional complexities and challenges to your life, that on top of what you're trying to do when you're actually running the business. So the one thing that I think is really interesting over the last dozen years or so, from in the kind of mid to late 90s, when a lot of businesses, particularly in consumer e-commerce, require significant amounts of capital to get going. So there, you mentioned Eve. Hotwire also was a very capital-intensive startup. And with that came all the complexities that you have to navigate through. And there's good outcomes and bad outcomes, but there's no doubt that the risk level goes up around that, the more money you raise. What I think is really interesting now is how much more capital efficient a lot of businesses now are in technology. So whereas you need $20, $30, $40 million to really give it a go, sort of back a dozen years ago, you now need a fraction of that. For a whole bunch of reasons from a technology standpoint, especially from an outsourcing standpoint. So what that means is, I think there's an extra incentive, I guess, to become an entrepreneur, because the reliance on capital is a lot less than has been the case in decades past.
Yeah, that's a great point. Super important. Andy, you got some?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. The company that I worked at prior to Stash was a company called Zillow.com, and they raised almost $100 million for a small company. And I think the biggest effect on the company was not the external influence, but it was on the fact that there was so much money and there was so little pressure to understand the market, and there was so much ability to waste that money, to try things that you didn't really ever have to follow through with. I think one of the really important parts of having a small, lean company is that there's very little margin for error, and you have to be very careful about what you invest in and what you think about. And Zillow is still doing fairly well, but I know that they would have been a more effective company if they had not had a $100 million cushion to rest on.
Great. Well, so I want to turn to Monica and just talk about the international scene for just a moment, and then we're going to go around and people kind of can share, have the option of sort of sharing kind of one lesson they've learned or one thing they'll never forget, and then we will open up to the audience. We started late, so I think we're planning to go is sort of, kind of 2:15, 2:20, and if that sounds good to everyone. So Monica, tell us a little bit about sort of the kind of international scene. I mean, there's kind of growing acceptance. I feel like there is a companies are going global much faster. There's also much more interest in emerging markets. And then, the work that you've been doing, obviously around microfinance is much more accepted now and starting to branch into other areas as well. So maybe you can comment a little bit about sort of the international perspective right now.
Sure. And maybe this is connected to Williams, and I listened to the morning panels, and I don't know if anyone from the class of 1961 is here, but I think it's wonderful that we're supporting the Center for Development Economics. It certainly was, thank you, it certainly was a big influence in my thinking and knowing I wanted to go international. I teach a class on impact investing, and the thesis is, what of the traditional VC and private equity model in Western markets can we carry over, and how much are there? And I think it's fascinating. I've actually read books, like Johnson, in terms of how did the VC market grow in the U.S. because there are analogs in emerging markets, and I think there's a few things that make it challenging. So, one, it's family-owned business, and I know obviously the friends and family is a big part, but it's such a huge piece, and the control question. So much of your status is tied to being the owner of a business. So it's not even just what Mariam and a couple folks have talked about, Eric, in terms of wanting to control decisions, lifestyle choices. It's about my position in society, and so how you navigate that as an investor and align incentives. I think that's a huge issue. I think the second thing, in terms of one of the benefits of coming late and learning from people a lot smarter than I am. And with more gray hairs if it's possible, is this notion of why did certain things evolve the way they did in the VC, and I think even the kind of market corrections we see, even in the VC, there's a lot of questions now, is the VC model broken? I think a lot of questions of maybe the way it's evolved, some of it is really valuable, but getting to take the best, you can say, well, which parts maybe can we leave behind, which is again a really great luxury. But mostly, I think a lot of the work I do, and I want to really underscore a word Mariam said, is the meritocracy. So one of the reasons why, for me, it's or just entrepreneurship in general, there are a lot of these countries, the political system, et cetera, or legacy systems, meritocracy is not how things are governed. So the idea of using entrepreneurship, which is this power, this energy that no one can tap, and I've done it from the microenterprise, so I've done microfinance for part of my career. And even if you're a poor person, the amount of pride and empowerment you feel if you start a business, to businesses that actually can make a dent in the GDP and actually could be businesses that go across borders. It's an incredibly powerful tool, and in economies where a lot is broken, it's still powerful. So there's a lot that doesn't work. There's parts of them that don't work because probably the original model wasn't the best, but what's really exciting is that the power that underscores the energy on this panel and abroad is still very much, I think, for me, a very inspiring part of my job, and also, I think, a very inspiring part of what we're seeing in these emerging markets.
Cool. So at this point, maybe kind of go around and start maybe that end. If you want to share kind of one thing that stuck with you, or one kind of lesson you'll never forget.
Sure. So I hope this doesn't sound like too forced of an analogy, but for me, being an entrepreneur feels a lot like attending a school like Williams. The nature of the job requires you to test yourself in so many different ways, to grow in so many different areas. a lot of the things you do, you'll hate, but then you'll also find that you're surprised at how much you like some of the things that you didn't know you were going to like. You're forced to try different things, and you'll have these great successes and these terrible failures. But along the way, you're surrounded by all these smart, passionate people that are all pulling in the same direction, and you're having a great time with it. And doesn't that feel like college? Like that was what I loved the most about my Willings experience, and that's, as I thought about it more, that's what I really love most about being an entrepreneur and doing this kind of work.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And we talk a lot about at Stash about there was a study done at MIT of a group of students in a class, and the top 10% in the class who got the best grades didn't do 50% better than everyone else. They did it 3 times as well as everyone else. And they said, why was it? Were they smarter? Well, everyone at MIT is smart. And the reason was these were the guys, the girls and guys who loved what they did. And they were thinking about the problem set in the shower. They were thinking about it on the way to work. They weren't like, this is the time to do the problem set. So when we look for team members, the single thing we look for is that passion for people who are really focused and love what they do. And that is, I think, going back to the idea of this iteration of ideas, it doesn't matter what your idea is. Maybe you'll stumble on a good idea. The single thing that matters is the team. And we've been very, very lucky, and that's what my advice to any entrepreneur is: find those great, what we call 3.5s on our team, that they're 3.5 times as efficient as normal human beings, because they're smart, passionate, autonomous, and nice. And if you find that combination, especially the nice is really important to Mariam's point, because they're the people who you also want to work with, and that creates this incredible ecosystem of innovation that continues, and it makes it a really great place to work, I think.
Have you patented that acronym? SPAN, smart, passionate, autonomous. All right. That's good. I'm going to take it. We're going to take it and license it. SPAN. I like that.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, I guess there might be just 2 things really quickly is, well, one of the challenges with a startup, especially if you raise money, is, and we've heard a little bit about, is how much time you spend managing a new constituency who's not your customer. And the marketplace now is incredibly unforgiving. Customers are incredibly unforgiving. I had a friend the other day using a BlackBerry, 6 months old. They tried to push a software update to him, and he said no. He took the software update, but it was too big for the processing speed on his BlackBerry. He was in Verizon and had a new phone within an hour. And that's the market we live in now. And if you're not focused on your customer, they're going to leave you just that fast. And the problem with VC funding sometimes is, and I think we've all been through it, is, they take more time than your children. And they can be incredibly consuming group of folks.
What are you trying to say? Josh? What are you trying to say?
And when you're spending your own money, you're always more focused than when you're spending somebody else's. I don't care how dedicated you are, how sincere you are, how hard a worker you are. When you write the check as an entrepreneur, it's such a different experience than when someone else writes the check. That would be one thing I'd want to throw out. But the last one would be, for any business that I've ever been involved in, always remember the mother-in-law test. If you can't explain it to her, it's probably a crappy idea. So, if you were all past the dating phase, but it used to be a real hindrance for me, so I would go and I have some great idea, and I'm going to conquer the world, sort of Kaufman, this is fantastic. And some girl's mother would scratch her head and say, you're just not cut out for my daughter at all. Okay, I got over that, but.
Let's see, I guess this touches, my lesson would be, it's tied a little bit to the financing question, try to get the market feedback with as little money and time as possible. And that's really one thing to come up with a great idea. What's probably more important is to be really creative and thinking about how can you test that? How can you find out, without having built a huge team and raise lots of money, and how to somehow reach out to the market with sort of maybe a just simpler version, or just go out to the customer before you've even built the product and see if they would have bought, and it's okay, now I'm going to go build that. So that's mine. as Eric was saying, it's cheaper now to do things, but sometimes you can even get that market feedback without having invested a lot. One tiny example. So my company, Django, we were trying to be like Pandora, and we were trying to be a bit like MySpace and social music, and we raised money, so it was a few $1 million, and some of it was mine, and all was basically finished. Financial crisis, we weren't going to be able to raise any more. We had gotten traction, but it wasn't enough money to pay the bills. So we were on the verge of turning it off. And actually, to speak to another point someone made about looking for ideas and from your employees, I had a new employee who her previous job for herself, she would basically get emerging artists to pay her to put their music onto these CDs, and then she'd go to music festivals and hand them out. It's like, God, bands are like that desperate to get heard that they would do that. And the problem from the band's perspective is they didn't know they're giving money to somebody, and maybe they were just taking the money, keeping it, or maybe they're taking the CDs and throwing it in the garbage. There was no way of knowing they were even getting played. So that little idea of, well, I have millions of listeners who build stations with the artists. They're like, maybe they would actually pay us to get played to other people who like that music, but we were out of money. So it was like a great idea. We were on the verge of shutting down, but what we did was we actually did create a fake page that laid out the marketing case of exactly that product. And here's what it does for you, and there's some backup pages, and even a credit card form, and we put it out to see would anyone actually give us any money. And enough people gave us money that we said, okay, believe me, we were wishing we never had the idea of Django at that time, but put another $500,000. And that business model actually worked. So now, a couple of years later, that's the majority of the business. But we were able to figure it out by literally sticking up a fake website and seeing if any customers would sign up.
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to answer that question first, because one of the really rewarding things about being an entrepreneur and being out there is it truly is an opportunity to learn an incredible amount about so many things. So whittling it down to just one is actually really, really hard. And I feel very thankful for that. But if I were to pick one, I think it's how to respond to a crisis that you don't expect. Because as an entrepreneur, you go through so many iterations and cycles of being paranoid. What are we going to do in this event or that event? Contingency planning, thinking through it on the way to the shower. It's that stuff you just think about all the time. But then you get the curveballs. You get the things that you just can't possibly anticipate. And in my experience, there were ones that were awful in every true sense of the word that we didn't possibly anticipate, and no one else did either. Like the awful events of September 11th. That was a big shock and surprise for all of us in this room, but particularly if you're running a fledgling travel company, that is a big one. And no amount of contingency planning can prepare you for something like that, and how to respond to when you're barely a year old, thousands and thousands of customers that all of a sudden are stuck, have nowhere to fly. How do you respond to that? The implications that it had on our business model, on our cash flow, on every single dimension, it was just massive. And that was a really amazing learning experience, unfortunately under very unfortunate circumstances. But it really responding to a crisis when it's not just about you. It's not just about how you respond. It's how you get an organization and a team to respond in a way that's appropriate and respectful across all those dimensions. Was something that happened multiple times over my time running businesses. Because there are other ones, ones that aren't as scary and bad. Responding to unexpected challenges happens all the time, particularly when you're running a consumer-facing business. There's always, I can't tell you how many Mastergram emails I got over the years. I mean, it's truly, no matter how good a job you try to do, you're always going to be pissing somebody off. And
try running Apollo about this.
I was going to go there with answering it,
A top ad business.
but
this is one where in terms of crises actually can lead to, initially were bad things to really good things. And there's a lot of good books and a lot of good academics that talk about how sometimes your worst customers end up becoming your best customers. In the event that you turn that that vitriol into a positive experience. That's where experiences like that can become truly extraordinary. So that's been a real big lesson for me, and one that I'm continuing learning from. It happens all the time, and it's helped me throughout my life.
Awesome. Hey, let's break this up again. Let me give these guys a little more time to think. Let's take a couple questions now, and also if you want to talk about your own entrepreneurial experience, feel free to do that as well. Hands. Ben, did you have something?
Just for a random question, one of the things I get confused about is what to do myself as an entrepreneur versus what to sub out and have other people do. And I'm curious in larger kind of startups if that's a question that you guys struggle with. From logo design to that stuff, and the smaller the business, the more told I am to do it myself, but there are pros and cons there.
Let's have maybe two people address that, and we'll try to keep quick so we can get a few other questions in.
As you were saying, it really depends what stage, obviously, you are in your company. But as I don't mention up here, I think one of the things as an entrepreneur is figuring out what you're good at and sticking to that and accepting what you're not good at and farming that out as quickly as possible. Obviously, when you're starting out, you're doing pretty much everything you can. You're calling mostly friends to help you out where they have their strengths. But when you can afford it, you can start outsourcing. One of the tricky things is finding a reliable resource. We went through a lot of different graphic designers that weren't exactly what we were looking for until we found the right one, lawyers, the whole thing. But again, I learned it's a very humbling experience. I learned pretty quickly what I was good at, what I wasn't, and then try to hire pretty quickly people who could kind of boost me up where I was falling down. So I'd say pretty much, wherever you can, where your weaknesses are, try to get some support for that.
That's great. One other person want to address that?
Sure. I find it's evolving constantly, so every stage of the business that steps up, I can delegate more because I can hire more. So I'm sort of honing in on the last core that I will do myself is really managing our design community and actually even farming off commerce and sales has now gone to a VP marketing. So I think it just evolves constantly, and it's whatever the core, the gold, the goose that lays the golden egg, whatever that core strategic asset is the last thing to delegate.
Cool.
What aspects of your Williams experience, and that can be academic or otherwise, do you see come up most in your day-to-day business? And is there anything that has proved particularly useful now looking back on?
And I can do it too because it's my lesson learned, and I'll say the relationships. Jeff said about being nice, and when the one thing about being an entrepreneur or being in a startup situation is that it's incredibly intense, and I'm someone who's not at my best when I'm stressed out. And I think, so when you think about relationships, of course, all of our deal flow comes from people that I know that have gone to graduate school, that I've gone to undergraduate school with, that are in the markets we serve. They're where I source good talent. But they're ultimately the source of, when things go bad, those really typical times, they're the people who say, you can do this, remember why you signed up. So the family relationships, the personal relationships, and I think Williams really seeded that.
That's been the biggest surprise for me. So I was a history major with a studio art concentration. So you think, how on earth does that have anything to do with business and entrepreneurship? And the answer is it's a lot. So when I think about history, it's really about people. It's really about emerging themes and picking them out. It's about storytelling. Art is about design, good design, a lot of it anyway. And those elements around people, storytelling, understanding themes, and hopefully before other people do. And appreciating good design, those are all elements that I use all the time. I think particularly around when you're in a situation where you have to lead an organization, the storytelling piece is the one that is particularly important. And to the extent that you can hone that early on at a place like Williams through writing and public speaking is a terrific gift a place like this can give you, without doubt.
And I'll echo both those points because, for me, first of all, I think it's interesting. Everyone said how it's getting to Plan B and it's being open to change and flexibility. You could think how a liberal arts degree really prepares you very well for that. But also, practically, I was also a history major, and I never would have gotten into technology. If Cliff and I didn't decide to start this business at that particular time, I would never have gotten into technology. So it's also, kind of relationships that you build that then come into play later. Other questions? Thoughts, questions? All in back?
One of the things that you, a couple folks on the table mentioned was this idea of managing your investors, managing your own autonomy. And I guess my question is, how do you go about saying, all right, this is something that's absolutely important for me to control? Because, VCs, angel investors, they're smart, they're former entrepreneurs, they've got their own ideas. How do you say, no, this is, my way is correct, your way, I'm going to listen to you, but, you're wrong.
And it probably gets back to having a very functional board, but anyone who wants to address that?
I don't view it as much different as a good management team, frankly. So one, we were talking about acronyms, good little snippets. So mine, the one that I always try to follow in those kind of environments is debate, align, commit. So I think it's always productive and healthy, whether you're dealing with a board or dealing with a management team, to get all the ideas that are out there. That's the debate phase. Getting and having an ability to sort of generate alignment around one of those. But then the most, I think, is to your point around committing. Once the group commits, hold them to it. In a nice way, but hold them to it.
I was going to say, I think there are two ways to achieve what you're talking about. And probably best, in my thinking, you can have structural ways to achieve control, meaning the number of board seats on a board. As an entrepreneur, you can have that, retain certain kinds of voting control, if anything ever came to a vote. But more importantly, really just being getting reasonable people to begin with onto the board, picking those people carefully, and then being reasonable yourself. So always I think if you can show that you're being open and having a dialogue, rather than just outright rejecting, I think that building that relationship and that hardship over time is important. And that to me has been critical to actually winning trust, and then being able to, and then you've always got to draw the line at, you're the CEO of the company, you're running the business. And not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that's firm but nice.
Well, I think to that point, I think it's getting investors. It's like picking co-founders. You said earlier, right? Especially if these people are going to be on your board, it's the same way you go about a co-founder. You know you're going to be in battle with these people. It's going to be stressful situations. But finding people that you trust, you have a good relationship with, more so than the name per se, maybe even the people that you have a good relationship with. Melissa, should we take a couple more? Should we wrap up? I don't know if Melissa's still here.
I'm here.
All right, we'll do lessons. Okay, should we take one more question? Okay, we have one more question right here. Oh, that's a good one.
What gave you the idea?
What gave you the idea to be an entrepreneur? Dan, you were like born that way. I don't know if you can address that.
So I was at Expedia, and it was a big company, and I was starting little companies inside of the big company, which sounds great because you have a health plan and a steady paycheck, and it's less risky, but it actually is really hard because big companies have figured out their business model and now are going to replicate that, and they bring in people who are really good at replicating that, and other people who are resistant to change, and it's actually really, really hard to do. So after starting 2 or 3 things at Expedia, I said, well, maybe it'd be easier in some ways to start on your own. I mean, it is a lot harder and it's riskier, it's scarier in some ways, but it's easier because you don't have to get an idea, bring it to a certain point, and then have a committee of 16 people who have never heard of it and now are going to decide and kill your idea. In fact, I'm such a fan of entrepreneurship in general because I'm so discouraged by big companies in general. If at our company, we're all refugees of places like Expedia, Microsoft, and Amazon. Amazon, I would say, is unique among those, is to be truly innovative, continue to innovate. But for the most part, once a company gets big, the focus changes from great innovation to short-term focus on revenue goals, and you see the degradation, the attrition of the customer focus and innovation. I think that's, other than Apple, everyone say, well, what about Apple or P&G? Other than that, it is pretty typical, and the really great ideas are coming from very small companies. And what's so interesting now, to Eric's point, is you have very small companies coming in and disrupting, markets. Mariam companies coming in and eating lunch at Hallmark or bigger companies, and probably minuscule next to them in terms of resources. But because that other one can't pivot in time, they can do that. And that's what's so exciting. I think it's sort of this big guy versus little guy, David versus Goliath.
And I'll echo that. I think we started our own VC firm because being a venture firm with 8 or 9 partners is very hard to get everyone in alignment and make decisions. And so we said we didn't want to do that. We want to be able to make decisions ourselves, and we did that. So let's wrap up with the last 3 kind of lessons learned. Scott, do you want to go first?
I'm glad I had a chance to think about this. So I haven't said so many entrepreneurial businesses, but one thing that I realized when I was working in my 20s and then working for about 10 years as an artist was that it seemed really important to kind of recognize a moment. That's the best word I can use to describe it. Say you were collaborating with a group of artists and there's just something, it's about a flow that happens at a particular time, and something that I think has to be concentrated on and practiced, because that can really make the difference between, say, a project working out. And I feel that way with the galleries as well. It's very, very important, particularly when working with other people, particularly when there's not strict hierarchies, when it's more of a collaboration and it's creative, to be aware of kind of that moment around you and then take advantage of that, because I don't think it's all a steady. There's one thing that I've been hearing, it's not a steady sort of A to B path, a steady stream that's sort of all over, so you have to be very aware of that environment.
Yeah.
I guess, again, a lot of lessons learned, especially when you don't expect to go into this line of work. But I want to go back to the last question about how did you know you want to be an entrepreneur? And I would say, just go with your gut. I'm a big fan of kind of going with your gut, with your instincts, with your passion, what you love, pursuing that. And I've always said that the entrepreneurism is equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. And every single day was both. And it's definitely a character builder. That which doesn't kill you will make you stronger. So I'd say I'm pretty strong at this point. But again, I had no intention, and a friend of mine suggested it. And it was one of those kind of aha moments. I'm like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow that path. So there's definitely some impulsivity with it as well. But if it's something that you love and believe in, you'll get through the scary part. I told my 7-year-old who's starting new sports, and he's like me. He doesn't like to do something he doesn't do well initially. So, I don't have a lot of hobbies, but I keep pushing him. It's like, just push through the scary part, and then it'll come. Then you'll like it, you'll get into it. And if you push through the scary part, like you're saying, when it's not working or when you're stumbling along, then things start to click, and then you can really, you can run with it. But you've got to have that conviction and the passion for it to really stick it out and do that.
Cool. Mariam, you got the last word.
Okay. The question about why did I want to be an entrepreneur? Well, because you can go and create entirely new things. And this market in this country, you can do that. You can get the money to do it, you can get the support to do it. It's fantastic. So you can create entirely new consumer products and services, and that's what I personally love to do. Lesson learned probably is about tackling fear. And mostly probably worse, the fear of failure and the fear of what other people will think about you when you fail. So for me, it's been really about learning to try to shut out the noise around, well, what are people going to think about me if I do this or do that? And I think because that's a very distracting, extremely distracting, energy-sucking kind of thing. So for me, that's been my biggest lesson learned, is how not to be afraid of that.
Awesome. Well, this was terrific. I want to thank everyone so much. I think we covered tons of really interesting, useful points. I personally would like to hear a lot more about starting monopoly cable companies in Azerbaijan and Armenia, but we'll save that for drinks later tonight. So please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you, Melissa, for setting this all up.